So as I'm sure you've heard by now, Texas A&M has hired Duke head coach Mike Elko to replace the absolute tire fire, train wreck, dumpster fire, and downright disaster that was one Jimbo Fisher. Want to give you my thoughts and reaction to that here today. Do I think it's a good hire that will work out? Where does A&M go from here? We're going to talk about all of that. But before we get into it, everyone right now, be sure to leave a like on the video. As you know, we have just started this brand new college football channel, and we are on the road to 1,000 subscribers. So help us get there by hitting the subscribe button down below. And while you're at it, leave a comment in terms of what type of stuff or what type of videos you want me to do. Give me some ideas because, we're just starting this off. I want to sort of gauge what your guys' interests are, who your favorite teams are, what type of topics you want me to talk about pertaining college football. So leave any recommendations down below. And, feedback is obviously greatly appreciated. All right, with that said, Mikey Elko, what do I think about this? Well, right off the gate, I want to say, as controversial as it is with many people, I do not think that this is a bad coaching hire at all. It's not the flashiest thing to ever have happened, but I don't think it's a bad hire. But we'll talk about that here in a second. I do have to say, however, first and foremost, that this coaching hire has to have been one of the weirdest ones I have ever seen in recent college football. And in fact, forget coaching hires. That was just one of the weirdest things I have seen in general in recent memory in this sport. So if you remember on Saturday, right, initially A&M announces they're going to be hiring Mark Stoops from Kentucky. And the fan base absolutely revolted at that. Now, I do have to say, I did not think that was a bad hire at all. And I understand why A&M fans were not the biggest fans of that. But you look at Mark Stoops, objectively a good football coach, right? I don't see how anyone could say that Mark Stoops is a bad coach. Here's a guy who took a Kentucky program that was nothing for very long and turned it into something that was decently respectable in the SEC, right? Definitely elevated Kentucky from what it used to be, got a couple 9-win seasons there. Again, I think it's pretty clear he's a good ball coach who, nothing is guaranteed, but probability wise, probably would not have been a bad move for Kentucky. But of course, the fans said they didn't want that. To them, it wasn't a flashy enough hire, to which I would say, on the flip side, that flashiness is not what wins football games. Press conferences and news headlines don't win football games. Good coaches who lead their teams to success win football games. And I did think Mark Stoops is a good coach who has a proven track record of winning football games. But with that said, okay, fine. So the A&M fan base says they don't like Mark Stoops as a hire. And then the university, or Texas A&M University, turns around and says, okay, then we're instead going to go hire the head coach from Duke. To which I say, seriously, what the heck is the difference, right? If you thought Mark Stoops wasn't flashy enough, wasn't exciting enough he's a small school coach, right? We don't want that. So you go and hire another small school coach who I would argue their resumes are basically comparable and equivalent. If anything, I would argue that maybe the advantage there goes to Mark Stoops because, hey, he's been a head coach for longer. He's actually been a head coach in the SEC. I know that Elko also was an assistant in the SEC, but Mark Stoops has been a head coach in the SEC, and to whatever that matters, So, it doesn't make a lot of sense to me. If anything, that's a lateral move. Mark Stoops and Mike Elko, basically the same thing. So, I'm never going to understand that. That's always going to be weird to me, but it is what it is. Mike Elko now is the new head coach of Texas A&M. And to my knowledge, a lot of Aggie fans also are not happy with this. So I don't know what that was. Honestly, that was kind of a joke in many ways. But with that said, let's talk about Mike Elko and his track record here. So from 2018 to 2021, he was the A&M defensive coordinator, obviously an assistant under Jimbo Fisher. And, to me, that does raise a couple red flags, mainly because I'm a USC fan and I am a little bit traumatized by our own track record of, hiring a bunch of former Pete Carroll assistants and them not all working out. But transitive property is not a real thing in college football. And so, that doesn't mean that Mike Elko will not work out. And so I'm not saying that. And you also consider he was the defensive coordinator from 2018 to 2021. The real reason, when you break it down, that A&M never got off the ground with Jimbo Fisher was never the defense. In fact, you go back and look at those defenses, most of them actually were pretty good. The problem obviously was always the offense, right? And so it is kind of concerning. Hey, you have a Jimbo Fisher, former assistant, that's, well, is that... But then on the flip side, you understand the problem never was the defense. It was always the offense. So I think that's fine. Then you go to his track record as the head coach of Duke. 2022, his very first season there, takes Duke to a 9-4 record, right? A 9-win season, which is very impressive when you consider it's Duke, right? Duke football historically has never been anything, right? But when I mean never anything, I mean you're talking like 4 to 5 wins a year. And so in year one, to take a team that is not very good and coach them up to a 9-win season, that is very impressive. And even this year, you look at the record on paper, they're 7-5. You could say maybe that's a little bit of a regression, but also keep in mind, Riley Leonard has dealt with injuries a lot this year. And when you actually watch them play, on screen, when you do the eye test, I think anyone who's honestly watched it will say that with Riley Leonard, Duke the entire year has been one of the better teams in the ACC, right? Maybe not the best team. Florida, like obviously goes to Florida State, maybe a couple teams, Louisville, etc., above that. But Duke, definitely, in terms of eye test, one of the better teams in that conference, which again, when you consider that it is Duke and what the expectations are, that is incredibly impressive there. Okay, so on paper, it definitely goes to show. Again, I get it. This is not the most exciting hire, but I would say with fair confidence, nothing is guaranteed, but you have pretty good reason to assume this is a good coach who will go and win you football games, right? Because obviously, he does not, there are not a lot of 5-star athletes, sitting around at Duke. But on top of that, I think what else is important to point out here is the fact that it shows how well he's able to kind of develop athletes, right? Because again, when you look at the Duke roster, not exactly a team riddled there with 5 stars, and yet he's coached them well into good players and a good team that kind of meshes together cohesively. And I think that's very important, because when you contrast that with what the problem with Jimbo Fisher was at A&M, right? As you know, Fisher 2021 has the #1 recruiting class, always recruited very well, but so it's a very talented team. That was always the case with Jimbo Fisher and A&M, but just could never seem to develop those players into meshing and playing as a good team on the field. And I think when you consider, hey, that's what Duke did, then maybe that kind of checks a box you thought you might have been missing at A&M, which is not necessarily recruiting, but the development of the players that you recruit. I think that is a good green flag from Mike Elko. And again, one last point I kind of missed here. I understand it's not the flashiest hire, but consider the fact that when you have a coach that doesn't work out, usually the next coach you want to go and get in many ways is the opposite of the last coach. And you look to Jimbo Fisher, that was as flashy and as news breaking a hire as you could get from Florida State. And obviously that didn't work out, right? USC last year or 2 years ago goes and gets Lincoln Riley. And, the final verdict on that is still yet to be seen. But, there's a flashy hire, at least this season, who has not been working out, right? Because again, the point is what? Press conferences, news headlines, those don't win football games. And so again, I understand the A&M fans not super excited about that, many of them, but I don't think that when you really break it down actually matters. Okay. And I think if it so works out that Mike Elko ends up winning you more football games than Jimbo Fisher, then who cares whether he was exciting or you got some big name coach? That just doesn't matter. I think it's an irrelevant, silly, and frankly, immature discussion here. Now, on the question of, do I think Elko will work out at A&M? I mean, I think the biggest thing you have to kind of be concerned about when you hire one of these coaches from a smaller name school, right, who kind of just has been overperforming, is not the fact that he'll develop players. I think that's proven he can develop players. He can do very good at that. I think biggest thing that will kind of determine his success are two things. First of all, can he continue to recruit on the level that Jimbo Fisher did? Because obviously Jimbo, you know, kind of a bigger name, was a good recruiter. And I think that's sort of the biggest concern you have when you take a coach from a small school is, okay, what a small school, you don't have to kind of recruit at the level and be as competitive in recruiting, you know, as a big name school. And that's obviously a big reason why a guy like Dan Mullen from Mississippi State didn't work out at Florida. So, you know, that's a concern. Now, what I will say is that I think when you kind of listen to Mike Elko talk, you kind of just see his demeanor and what you hear about him in coaching circles. He does seem to be a guy who has the eye of the tiger, who has that it factor, that competitive drive. And so I'm not super concerned that he won't be able to go out there and recruit. But, you know, obviously that is something to question and keep an eye on. But again, you know, long term, I don't think it's something I personally would be super worried about. I guess the other question, of course, is can he finally turn the A&M offense into something functional, you know, because that, of course, has always kind of been the problem with Fisher. And, you know, I think that's obviously that remains to be seen. Obviously, he managed to turn Riley Leonard and Duke into something that was functional. And so, you know, but obviously that awaits to be seen. So the final verdict on this, again, do I think it's the most exciting coaching hire? No. But if I were to bet, I think this is a hire that will generally work out pretty well at A&M, right? Of course, it hinges on whether he is able to recruit at a high level, which when you actually look, I understand A&M is not the biggest name brand, but the investment they've put into the program over the past decade or so, the resources, they are all there, right? They're all there, very competitive, arguably one of the better jobs in college football in terms of the resources you have, right? So that's all there. Everything there is set up for success. You know, it doesn't look like Fisher will be leaving him a super depleted roster. We'll have to see how the transfer portal goes and all that. I would not be surprised year one if Elko kind of goes like 6-6 or something. But long term, I think generally Aggie fans, you'll be fine. You got a solid head coach. Now, will he be the head coach that delivers you the national championship you ultimately want? I don't know about that. But am I confident he'll be able to turn A&M into, you know, a decent program and kind of maybe get over the hump that Jimbo couldn't get you over? Absolutely. So with that said, you know, again, not the flashiest hire, not the most exciting. I also don't understand why some of you guys are revolting so hard against this and why you were revolting so hard against Mark Stoops. Because again, you know, flashiness doesn't win you football games. Flashy coaches don't win you football games. And if you didn't learn from Jimbo Fisher that was the case, I don't know what to tell you. So I would say sit back, be patient, give him 2 to 3 years, see where he is, okay? But if I were to kind of guess, I think he has the intangibles. I think he's a good coach. I think he has what it takes. I think he'll take you to some pretty good seasons and successes. And that's what I have to say about it. But with that said, folks, let me know what you think of the A&M coaching hire in the comment section down below. Be sure to leave a like and subscribe. And again, see you guys later. God bless. Have a very good day. Peace.